The Best of Our Knowledge explores topics on learning, education, and research. Coming up, we'll learn about curious orcas and killer whales that gift fish and food to people. The Supreme Court has issued a decision that could have impacts on religious freedom in schools, and we'll speak with an artist whose medium of choice is Lego. I'm Lucas Willard, host of The Best of Our Knowledge. This is The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. As their nickname implies, killer whales are top predators in seas around the world. But orcas are also curious creatures, and people from Canada to New Zealand have documented instances where the whales give them fish and other food. Jared Towers, a researcher at Bayes Ecology in British Columbia, is the author of a study that examines gifting behavior from these intelligent creatures. I spoke with him to learn more.
I currently live in Alert Bay, also known as home of the killer whale, on the west coast of British Columbia in Canada, traditional territory of the Namgis First Nation. And I've been working with killer whales as long as I can remember. But professionally, I've been studying them as a scientist for the last 20 years. And my work has taken me all around the world. I've studied killer whales in almost every ocean. And primarily, I'm looking at their behaviors and their abundance, and their health, and have been involved in a variety of studies on these topics.
What fascinates you about killer whales, and why have you decided to pursue this as a career?
Well, I think killer whales are one of those things that have been constant in my life. There's a lot of killer whales around where I live, and my parents owned a whale watching company when I was a child. And so it was a very natural thing for me. But as I've aged and come to understand killer whales better and have been exposed to more populations, I've actually learned a lot about, people and humanity through my studies of killer whales, in the sense that killer whales share a lot of traits with people that we don't share with other animals. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things about them.
Yeah, and your study that was published in the Journal of Comparative Psychology explores exactly behaviors with killer whales interacting with humans. And I read this, and it made me just think of, I have a cat that will
Hmm.
bring things to me, rubber bands and little things throughout the day as little gifts that the cat finds. And I couldn't not make that comparison when I looked at your research here. Is that something that you also see a parallel to, that killer whales can exhibit behaviors that we often see in our pets?
Absolutely. But I think the main difference here is that what we see when a dog fetches a ball for us or a cat brings a gift is that these are domesticated animals. Another example would be even a falcon, who's used in falconry, is used for hunting, and it brings back some of its kill to its owner. But in that case, those animals are they're owned or they're trained and or domesticated. And in this case, these are wild killer whales, the world's apex predator, and they're just coming up and offering food to people they don't know. So it is different in that sense.
But they also are, in recognizing that people are living beings and other creatures, uh, they're attempting to make communication in their own way.
Yeah, I think that's almost safe to suggest. I think that just realizing that another species has a mind and can take on its own perspectives is something that killer whales probably are doing and have the capacity to understand. It's called theory of mind. And this study really illustrates that. We don't often think of other animals as having theory of mind, but it may be that our cats and our dogs do. In this case, killer whales are thought to be much smarter than your average cat or dog. They've got very large brains and very developed brains. And so it's quite likely that they're using them in many different ways to engage with things in their environment that they don't understand.
So let's talk specifically about your research and the analysis that was involved in this study. And can you tell me about the scope of the study? Where were these whales observed, and how did you and your team actually dig into this research?
Okay. So back in 2015 was the first time I ever had a killer whale offer me something. It happened again in 2018. And at that point, I was truly mystified. And, I shouldn't have been surprised. But the thing is that I spend a lot of time with orcas. And these kinds of things are very rare. So when it does happen, it's like, as my colleague Tesley Shaw said, after the second time it happened in 2018, she just said, "Did that just happen?" Because it's what we were all thinking. And then through conversations with a few colleagues, especially a colleague in Mexico and another one in New Zealand, they mentioned that these kinds of events are happening there. Uh, once in a while. And in my experience, they're just not happening up in this part of the world in British Columbia as often as they do in Mexico or New Zealand. But they've also been documented in other populations, once in Norway. And even we found out more accounts since we published our paper. We have an account from Antarctica, another one from Spain, and a couple from Argentina. So it may be that one of our findings is that some populations of killer whales are more predisposed to engage in exploratory behavior with people by offering them food than other killer whale populations are, which is interesting in itself.
And could this also come down to just individual whales, where some whales have a more outgoing personality in a way?
Yeah, I think you're right because we have found related killer whales doing it on multiple occasions in some places. And so that may be that, there could be a learned component of the behavior in that sense where, mom did it or grandma did it. And then, it got replicated by their offspring over time. And what we've also found, like I mentioned, is that some populations do it more than others. I spend a lot of time with a fish specialist population of killer whales. These guys don't eat mammals at all. They only eat fish. And we started wondering why they've never been observed offering food to people before. And the only thing we could come up with is that there's two things actually. Is one, that dietary specialists have less to gain by acquiring general knowledge. So they're not as engaged in exploratory behaviors as dietary generalists are, which have more to benefit from learning about all the different things in their environment that they could eat. If one prey resource becomes less abundant or something, they can switch. It doesn't make sense for a dietary specialist to do that. On the other hand, these whales are also eating fish that are relatively small compared to a seal or a dolphin or another whale, which other killer whales and other populations kill. So it may be that they don't have as much food to spare, and so therefore aren't just offering it to other creatures like these other ones do.
Now, you documented in the study that not only would the whales bring people food, but they'd also kind of stick around to see if the people ate it too, or took it as well. And,
Yeah.
and there's also instances of the whales insisting on giving this food, even when people tried to refuse it.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit more about this behavior that you've noticed when doing this research?
Yeah, they seem fairly insistent sometimes. At certain times, people have accepted the offering and then thrown it back or just refused to pick it up. And in both cases, on occasion, killer whales have picked it back up and then re-offered it. It's almost like, no, you first, I insist. It's hard to really know exactly what's going on in those cases, but they seem insistent on offering people food, getting their point across, and trying to perhaps search for or prompt a response from people. That really seems to be what they're most engaged in, because in 97% of cases, they did wait for people to respond, and they sat there and watched and looked, or in one case, swam around the boat slowly for about 20 seconds before picking up the item again and swimming off and consuming it themselves.
Now, Do whales share food in the wild with each other, with other whales?
Well, killer whales do. Yeah, they're quite well known for prey sharing. And so that may be a really, well, it is a very important part of the study for contextualizing this behavior, is that the sharing of prey is really foundational to killer whales all around the world. They're getting offered food by their mothers when they're young, but prey sharing goes on throughout their entire lives. Adult females, adult males. They're often sharing with unrelated whales, related individuals of all ages. They have their preferred sharing partners, of course, but they do share widely. So, yeah, the offering of prey is something that is very habitual for orcas, and it may be that in these cases they're just doing what they normally do, but offering it to us just to see what we'll do.
And Jared, after this study was published, where will your research take you next? And does this only scratch the surface of orca behavior that you want to further explore?
Yeah, a lot of my work really focuses on behaviors that just can be contextualized from, observing whales, documenting them, or, looking at telemetry data of one kind or another and describing how they feed or how they socialize. But this is the only work I've done which actually looks at the interface between people and killer whales. And I'm not sure how much farther we can take that without becoming fairly invasive. And the thing I like about this study is that people were approached by orcas, and these were situations that were beyond our control as researchers. And and I'm not sure this type of behavior is common enough for us to say much more about it at this point. But yeah, so for now, I'm going to continue focusing on the ecology and, health and abundance of killer whales and their natural behaviors. And if this continues happening from time to time, we'll continue documenting it.
Well, thank you so much for speaking about your research and telling me about these animals. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Jared Towers is a researcher at Bay Cytology in British Columbia. You're listening to The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. The U.S. Supreme Court in June issued a decision in a case that could have impacts on religious freedom in schools and the ability of parents to object to instructional materials. The 6-3 decision in Mahmoud v. Taylor sides with religious parents in Maryland, who sought to remove their children from classroom lessons featuring LGBTQ books. The court's conservative majority found in its ruling, which is not a final decision in the case, that parents were likely to succeed on their claim that their religious beliefs support a right to opt out their children. Daniel Morton Bentley, General Counsel and Deputy Commissioner for Legal Affairs for the New York State Education Department, says the department is disappointed with the decision. He says the case unnecessarily interjected the court in a dispute over a local school district curricula. I spoke with Morton Bentley to learn more.
This case arose out of Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland. Is a very big school district, over 150,000 students. And they, a few years ago, added LGBTQ books to their English language arts curriculum. After getting complaints, the school board developed this notification and opt-out procedure where parents who claim to have religious objections could excuse their children from instruction when those books were read. The board rescinded that in 2023, both because it presented logistical challenges and, in their view, subjected LGBTQ students to social stigma and isolation. So a coalition of parents then brought this lawsuit, which went up to the Supreme Court.
And the Supreme Court has issued a decision here. Why is New York State opposed to the outcome? I understand that the state will respect the authority of the Supreme Court in this decision, but this is not the outcome that the state would have preferred.
Yeah, I think that a big portion of this decision relies on this zero sum idea that the LGBTQ identity and religious beliefs, according to the court, are on this collision course, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. and what is a win for one group is a loss for the other. And that's something that we disagree with at the department. And I think that the case also presents a lot of questions. It's very clear who won at this stage. But for example, how are schools who already have been placed at the center of so many culture war issues going to evaluate the sincerity of religious beliefs before them? It's actually something that schools in New York and the state education department have experience with when there was a religious exemption to school immunizations. And it's a frustrating and tough process to try to judge people's religious beliefs, decide whether they are entitled to something. Another challenge it has is that religious families will have this right if, according to the court, a law imposes a burden of the same character as that in Yoder. And Yoder versus Wisconsin is a case about whether Amish families can effectively opt out of instruction after the middle school. But what the same character as Yoder means is a novel phrase that we have little guidance on.
In your view, how will this court decision affect local control at school districts and the ability for school districts to develop programs and curriculum?
I think there's a lot of concern based on the approach of this decision, but I don't think it's going to have a huge impact. I think that people trust their local schools in large part, and people have open lines of communication in districts through parent representatives, through teachers unions, open school board meetings. I think that school boards is largely, and curriculum is a local issue. That's another thing that makes this decision so jarring. There's a federal law, 20 USC 1232A, which provides the federal government cannot interfere in any local matters of curricula, and that's been on the books for decades. So I think that captures the spirit that we have in our state, that curriculum decisions are made at the local level. So I anticipate that we do have to comply with this ruling throughout in New York State, throughout the country, but I think that it won't represent a sea change.
Now, when it comes to programs or educational curricula that does deal with LGBTQ plus issues, how will New York continue to commit to its own diversity goals without violating any federal decision making and therefore becoming a target for potential lawsuits or withholding of federal funds or any of the other tactics that we're seeing in Washington right now?
Yeah, great question. So the good news is at most, this decision represents allowing some families to not receive portions of required instruction. So the good news is that, New York State, we at the state education department set learning standards, which is what we expect students will know and achieve. And schools are still going to have the freedom to select materials that they believe are going to meet those goals. But this is an area that, again, this decision doesn't provide much help or guidance. And in fact, the court majority did acknowledge, as the school board argued, that tolerance, respect, our diversity are legitimate values. It just chose to say, but in this instance, the religious family's rights trump them.
So when it comes to school districts communicating with parents who may object to certain classroom lessons or materials, because of a lack of federal guidance in this case, will the state be developing any guidance or sharing any guidance with districts on how to communicate with families and to allow certain religious exemptions to proceed?
Yeah, I don't think we have plans at this time to offer, proscriptive guidance, but I can say that our policy office is working on guidance to the field about more generally how to address these issues of parents who have concerns about the curriculum and how it will be addressed.
And along those lines, For anybody who does have any questions about this Supreme Court case, or for any local districts that would require some more information, where can they go?
Yeah, the state education department always provides technical assistance to anyone who asks, to the best of our ability. Sometimes when it's a legal question like this, though, we can't provide guidance on specific facts. But I would encourage families reach out to the administration of your local school district, ask them what this means, share your concerns with them, and I think that's a way of getting around this zero sum framing that the court has given us is have a dialogue at the local level. Don't be afraid to say, here is where I come out and what can you do to help me? I think that opting out is never a good strategy for any difficult issue. It's by engaging with people and ideas with which we disagree that we ultimately come out in a better place.
Daniel Morton Bentley is General Counsel and Deputy Commissioner for Legal Affairs for the New York State Education Department. This is The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. A former lawyer, Nathan Sawaya, traded his cases for bricks. The artist is known for his use of Lego, including original sculpture and recreation of famous artworks. WAMC's Jesse Taylor spoke with him about his work ahead of an exhibition opening in Schenectady, New York.
Well, I'd worked with other media over the years. I'd done sculpture out of clay and wire. And it was just one day I thought back to my childhood about playing with Lego bricks. And I thought, I wonder if I can create art out of Lego. So I started experimenting with it and really found I enjoyed using it as a medium. And then realized people really enjoyed seeing my art made out of Lego because it made the art very accessible, right? They could connect to that type of art because they were so familiar with the toy.
You know, you said you thought back to your childhood. Were you somebody that played with Legos all the time as a kid?
Yeah, I had Lego bricks as a child. I got my first set, I think, when I was like 5 years old. And I had parents who really encouraged creativity, so they allowed me to have like this big 36 square foot Lego city when I was growing up. So it was something I could go and play with as, let really my creative juices flow. But then as I grew up and went in different directions, I actually became a lawyer for a while. So it took some time before I came back to Lego. And when I came back to it, it was as an art medium.
So when did you come back to it?
Well, I'd started playing around with it when I was a lawyer. I would come home after long days at the law firm, and I would need some sort of creative outlet. And sometimes I would paint, and sometimes I would draw, and sometimes I would sculpt. And it was around then where I just, started experimenting with Lego. I put a little website together, and I started getting interest and was selling works and realized, wow, there's really something to this. So I eventually left the law firm and had my first solo art exhibition in 2007.
I think 2007 was when one of your more famous pieces, Yellow, came out. Is that right?
Yeah, it was right then. It was one of my pieces that has really defined my career. A lot of people reach out to me about Yellow. It's this figure kind of tearing its chest open, and all these yellow Lego bricks are spilling out. I think more people contact me about that piece than any other piece I've done, so it's become rather iconic. But for me, it's just one of those signature pieces where I've taken the human form, created out of this child's toy, and tried to put some emotion into it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about, Yellow and kind of that motif of a chest being open and then something spilling out of it or coming out of it. I've seen that in a few of your pieces that I saw over the internet. Is there anything to that? What are you trying to accomplish with that motif?
Well, I think for me, it's about transition and giving everything you have. It's about, your soul spilling out almost. I think a lot of my pieces do focus on metamorphosis and change and transition because I've gone through many changes in my life. I've gone from some very dark places to where I'm at now. And, I think creating art is something that really got me through those dark places. And so, yeah, I use that motif a lot because, I'm just relying on my own personal journey.
Would you be willing to speak a little bit about some of those dark places that you've been to?
Well, I suffer from depression, and so some of my works have really focused on that. I have found that when I'm in, a depressed place, sometimes the best thing I can do is create art. And not everything I create in those moments is something you're going to see in an exhibition, but it is kind of a way to pull me out of things. I think I go into a bit of a trance when I'm working. I just have music playing in the background. It's just me alone in the studio, and I'm just working with the bricks, trying to create something. So it's a slow, methodical, sometimes tedious process, but for me, it really helps me get through things.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about your process a little bit too. What does that look like? Is it something where, you're just sitting and an image pops in your head and you kind of just start working on it? Or is it just you take a bunch of Legos and as you go, you just build and it kind of metamorphosizes into something new?
Well, it depends on the piece, right? Like sometimes I'm focusing on something the world's never seen before, which is just coming from my mind. But some other times I might be replicating, say, a famous work of art. So it all starts with that idea. Where does that idea come from? It's hard to say. Fortunately, having multiple art exhibitions touring these days, I get to travel a lot. I use that travel experience for inspiration because I meet new people, experience different cultures, go to different locations. I take that and try and come up with new pieces. Once I have that new idea, it's a process of just kind of maybe planning it out in my mind. Like I want to see that final piece in my mind before I even put down that first brick. And then it's just a slow process of brick by brick. Now, part of my process is that I glue each individual brick into place as I go. It's because my exhibitions travel, I want to make sure the pieces stay together. So there is this slow process of gluing each brick together, which means, if I make a mistake, I have to use a hammer and chisel to tear it apart. So you definitely have to have patience for this job.
Do you ever think about going back to being a lawyer?
No, I let my legal license expire. I didn't want that safety net.
Artist Nathan Sawaya speaking with WAMC's Jesse Taylor. This has been The Best of Our Knowledge, episode 1818. The Best of Our Knowledge is a national production of WAMC, Northeast Public Radio. Thanks to associate producer Madeline Reynolds. The latest on all National Productions programs is available via the Airwaves newsletter and our flagship station's website, WAMC.org. Until next time, I'm Lucas Willard.